Sorry. Got to hit YouTube. All right, so let's see. So we are starting. Hey, Amud Aleph, 5a, 3 lines down from the top. 3 lines down from the top. Okay. Good. Ashara legasi haruach minayin. What's the incredible Gemara? How do you know? What is the scriptural warning, scriptural allusion for arrogance? We're going to spend a lot of time today speaking about the destructive nature of gasi haruach, arrogance. So where do we know it from? Amar Rava, Amar Ziri, Shimu va'azinu al tigbo. So we'll say the pasuk, however, is quoting the pasuk from Yomi. Literally again, listen and hearken. Literally again, al tigbo. Literally, don't make yourself gavoa. Don't make yourself high. Don't make yourself high. So here again, the Navi itself is saying, do not become an arrogant individual. Your hearts will become elevated, which Rabbi says is not a good thing. Reference to arrogance over here, and you will forget Hashem uksiv. And the pasuk says, "Hishamar lecha pen tishkach es Hashem elokecha." Ukid Rabbi Avin am Rabbi Eli, dam Rabbi Avin am Rabbi Eli, komakom shenamar hishamar pen va'al. Whenever the Torah says these words of hishamar pen and al, eno ela below sasa, that is always coming to introduce a lav, always coming to introduce a biblical prohibition. Good. So we'll say so far multiple psukim highlighting the biblical prohibition, Rabbi say, to become arrogant. Incredible. So we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, it's incredible to see an isser, right, a lav, potentially a lav daraisa, about an emotional state, right? In other words, this is not a behavior, right? Of course, arrogance can manifest itself in behavior, right? But lamaisa, what you see over here is Tanakh, finding psukim, mamish, legislating against an emotional state, an incredible thing. So Gemara says, Darash Rav Avira. So Avira, right? Rav Avira darshan, Zimnin Amrli Mishnei Rav Asi, Zimnin Amrli Mishnei Rav Ami. Kol Adam, Sheyesh Po Gasas Ruach. Whichever person has arrogance, right? Every person has arrogance. L'sof mismait. Rabbi say in the end he will be diminished. Rabbi say what this means is, Rashi just says michashivuso. Rabbi say what this means is as follows: that the whole chap of arrogance is a person thinks they're the center of the world and believes that they deserve kavod. While people who walk around life believing that they deserve kavod, at the end the exact opposite happens. In other words, not only do they not receive the kavod they think they desire, but they're actually diminished. Their standing actually decreases. An incredible idea. Shneimar romu ma'at b'shema tomar yeshno ba'olam. Maybe you'll say. So I'll say again. It's about romu ma'at. A person wants to be high, right? The person thinks that they deserve all of this kavod. Ma'at. They're actually diminished. Both say first wide line. Yeshno ba'olam. Well, both say you ask yourself, maybe does such a person even continue to exist in the world? Tamalomar ve'inenu. Such a person doesn't even exist. In other words, both say when we speak about the arrogant person being diminished, not only is he diminished, but often he lacks any form of meaningful standing in this world. Now, both say now if a person does tshuva, choser means what? Let's say I'm suffering from arrogance, which could happen, and then again I realize the error in my ways, and I want to do tshuva. I want to change things around. So the Gemara says ne'asaf bizmano. But say ne'asaf bizmano means again, ultimately I'll die at my appointed time. In other words, the arrogance will not cause me to be lost from the world. Mikol and Kol. So we'll say again, the Gemara just equating the Humchu Kichol, and therefore Av Mitzchak Yaakov, he says Lashon Bakol Mikol and Kol. V'im Lav, and we'll say if not. In other words, if I don't go ahead and do tshuva from my arrogance, so what ends up happening? Ukirosh Shiboles Yimodu. So we'll say over here, the Gemara quoting from the pasuk. Gemara quoting from the pasuk over here, Karosh Shibolima from Eov, from Karosh Shiboles Yimalu. Now, what does this mean? Mayu Karosh Shiboles. I'll say, what's now Shiboles? Shiboles is a stalk of wheat. What does it mean? Karosh Shiboles, like the head of the wheat. Rafun Rachista Chad Amar Kisasa Dishabilta. One says it refers to the beard of a stalk of wheat. I want to say, what's the beard of a stalk? You say, if you ever see a stalk, right? So there's like the part with the kernels. It's calling that the beard, right? That's the beard of the stalk of the wheat. So v'chad amar kishiboles atzma. One says like the stalk itself. So I'll say, so now what does it mean that the arrogant person is like the sasa the shibalta? What does that mean? Listen to this. So it's according to the one who says that the arrogant person is like the beard of the stalk of wheat. It makes sense that he says kirosh because the beard is towards the top of the stalk. So rather the Gemara says ela lemandamar kishubilta atzma my ukaroshi bolas. But the one who says like the stalk himself, what does it mean like the head of the stalk? Amravasi v'cheitara de Rabbi Shmuel mashallah adam shenichnas l'soch sadeu. Rabbi say could be compared to a person who goes into the field. He goes into his field. So he says gavoa gavoa humalakit. Which stalk of wheat does he go ahead and pluck out first? The one that's tallest. So we'll say, what's the nimshal over here? When a person has gaiva, a person is arrogant, gasei ruach, and what happens? They put themselves above everyone else. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, walks through the world and plucks people out, who does he pluck out first? The one who puts himself above everyone else. That's the nimshal over here. Incredible. So we'll say, this Gemara, by the way, is ridiculously amazing. Watch this. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows, quoting over here the pasuk from Yeshayahu. So we'll say, so the pasuk goes like this: V'es daka v'shafal ruach. So we'll say, so again, v'es daka v'shafal. So what's daka? So daka ultimately again means a humble one. Shafal ruach means lowly of spirit. Again, speaking about humility. So watch this. So we'll say, Rav Huna Rav Chisda Chadamar. Iti daka. So we'll say it's a little bit of a play on words. V'es daka. So one darshans v'iti daka. So we'll say, what is iti daka? Kadosh Baruch Hu says about a humble person like this: I take the humble person and I elevate him towards me. Right? In other words, what's the reward for humility? A person is humble, they lower themselves. Hashem says, I will take the humble person, iti daka, and I will elevate him towards me. The Chadamar, no. Ani es daka. The other opinion says, no. Hashem doesn't elevate the humble person towards him. Rather, both say it's just the opposite. What happens? Hashem goes down to the humble person. Rabbi say, hear this distinction? And again, it's all the same phrase. It's a play on words in the pasuk. V'es daka. So first opinion, iti daka, I lift the humble person up towards me. Second opinion, v'ani es daka, I go ahead and go down to the humble person. We're supposed to listen to this. Umistabra kiman da'amar ani es daka. And it seems to be that the correct opinion is the one who says that Hashem goes down to reside with the humble one. Rabbi say, what's the raya? This is beautiful. So Hashem, remember when Hashem wanted to give the Torah, what did he do? He passed over all of the incredibly tall mountains, V'hishra shchinaso al Har Sinai, and he went ahead and rested his shchina on Har Sinai. Rabbi say, not only that, V'lo gava Har Sinai lemala. See, I will say, if you notice, this is incredible insight. Hashem didn't make Har Sinai tall. Instead, what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He lowered himself onto Har Sinai. I will say that is the power of humility. The power of humility is God doesn't lift the humble person up. The power of humility is something even greater. Hashem comes to reside with the humble individual. I will say, isn't that exceptional? If I'm humble, Hashem comes to meet me where I am, which I will say, if you think about it, is so much of a greater reward, right? In other words, there's two possibilities with humility. Hashem lifts the humble person, which is beautiful. Hashem brings the humble person up to, or no, even better, Hashem goes down to be with the humble person. So the Gemara says, Har Sinai is the raya, Hashem goes down. The Gemara says similarly, similarly, again, when Hashem appears to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem goes ahead and doesn't appear to Moshe Rabbeinu, in a mighty large tree. Instead, where does he appear to Moshe Rabbeinu? In a small bush, right? In a small bush. Ultimately, again, representing this idea, va'ani es daka. I go ahead and I come down to the humble one. Rabbi Lazar, any person who has arrogance, he should be uprooted like an Asherah tree. Let's remember again, Asherah tree is for Avodah Zarah. So a person who has arrogance should be uprooted like an Asherah. Ksiv halcha, v'rami akoma giduim, uksiv hasam, v'ashrem tigadeon. So we'll say the same notion of uprooting by arrogance and by Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Lazar, any person who is arrogant, Ein afro ninar. Rabbi says this is profound. Any person who is arrogant, literally, Rabbi says Ein afro ninar means his dust, his remains are not stirred, which means Rabbi say he is not resurrected by Tchias HaMesim. Incredible, no? Not resurrected by Tchias HaMesim. Shene'emar, Hakitzu beranenu shochne afar. Because also remember again, the pasuk that references Tchias HaMesim, ultimately again is in Yeshayahu, which literally means wake up, and rejoice, shochne afar. Now, we translate shochne afar as those who sleep in the dust. It doesn't say shochve ba'afar. It doesn't say those who sleep in the dust. Rather, ela shochne afar, which means what? Mishenase shachin la'afar b'chayev. It refers to someone ultimately who was a neighbor of the dust in his lifetime. I will say, who's a neighbor of the dust? Someone who's humble. Someone who's humble. As I will say, but just to understand like the profundity of that, what's the pshat that someone who's arrogant? I just want to point out, it's so fascinating that you don't see this. Right? You don't see like someone who, I don't know, someone who ate treif, or someone who committed arayos, doesn't come back for Tchias HaMesim. I don't know, right? But yes, someone who's arrogant, the Gemara says, doesn't come back for Tchias HaMesim. What's the pshat? See, I will say, the whole chap is when someone is arrogant, right? They feel like the entirety of life and the world is about them. So essentially, I was saying, an arrogant person has already taken more from this life than is due to them. Right? You think everything is about me, right? Everything is about me. So if everything is about you, you've already taken more from Olam Haza, more from this life already that is coming to you. So okay, so to speak, you've already lived multiple lives. So therefore, again, you don't get Tchias HaMesim, such an incredible idea. But yes, someone who's humble, shachin la'afar, incredible. But we'll say any person who's arrogant, the Shechina cries for such a person. Shneemar v'gavo mimercha ki yeda. So we'll say this is really incredible idea. Why does the Shekhinah cry for someone who's arrogant? I was saying, because the truth is, we know this. Arrogant people are often masking severe insecurity, right? Well-adjusted, happy, and healthy people do not need to be arrogant. Arrogant people are overcompensating. So I will say, when you see your child overcompensating for something because they feel deficient, that is a sad thing for a parent to see. The Ribono Shel Olam, and I will say there's such a different perspective, because up until now, we've seen almost like a sense of anger towards the Baal Gaiva. Here, the Gemara says there's a sense of sadness towards the Baal Gaiva. Kadosh Baruch Hu feels sad for a child who feels so insecure, who feels like such a nothing, that they need to overcompensate with a sense of Gaiva. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows: Darsha Bavira Vitim Rabbi Elazar Bourei Shlo Kamidas Chadash Baruch Hu Midas Basar V'Dam. See how Hashem is different than man. How so? Midas Basar V'Dam Gavoa Ro'as HaGavoa Ve'in Gavoa Ro'as HaShafal. So we'll say in worldly, right? In human beings. So literally again, someone who's high, someone who's tall, will see someone who's tall, but someone who's tall may not see someone who's short. I will say the way it works by human beings, all right, is that our line of vision often extends straight. So therefore, I'll see someone who's on my same level, right? Tall will see tall, short will see short, but often tall will overlook short because it's not necessarily my range of vision. Gavoa Ro'as HaShafal. Kadosh Baruch Hu is Gavoa, right? Who is tall, right, high above everything else. Who does he see most? The Shafal, right? The short, the lowly, and the humble. Shneimar Kiram Hashem v'Shafal Yirah. Amrav Chisitim Amr Okva. Kadem Sheish V'Gas Hasaruach. Any person who's arrogant, Amra Kadosh Baruch Hu Ein Ani V'Hu Yichon Ladar Ba'Olam. That was incredible. If someone is arrogant, you know what Hashem says? Not enough room in this town for both of us, right? Literally not enough room in this world for both of us. So we know this. The arrogant person ultimately, again, takes up all the space. Shneimar, Melashana B'Seis Ra'eu, Osa Atzmis Gavai Naim Urachav Levav, Oso Lo Uchal. So the Gemara says, don't mean Oso Lo Uchal, Atikri Oso Lo Oso Ela Ito Lo Uchal. Don't read it as Oso Lo Uchal, rather as what? Iti, right? Ito Lo Uchal. I cannot live together with this individual. I'll say, not enough room. I'll just point out to her something amazing. There is a beautiful vart by the Kotzker. The Kotzker brings down, I will say again, that the Mishnah Maseches Avos very quickly talks about the multiple miracles that occurred within the Beis HaMikdash. So one of the miracles, the last miracle actually that the Mishnah recounts was Omdim Sufufim Mishtachavim Revachim. That when we stood in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, it was packed. People like stand. Sufufim means like squished, right? Mishtachavim, when we would bow down, there was plenty of room. So Rashi, Rabbi Yomi explained what is this referring to. They say the miracle is referring to Yom Kippur. That what would happen is everybody would come on Yom Kippur, even though there's no mitzvah aliyah l'regel on Yom Kippur. Everyone wanted to see the Kohen Gadol do the avoda, so they would come. They both say when they would bow down would be for vidui, for confession. So the problem is, what's wrong with confession? I don't want anyone hearing my confession because it's very private. So there was a miracle that when they would bow down, ultimately there'd be room for everyone to recite their confession privately to themselves. The Kotzker says like this, it means something different. Omdim says Omdim is a Baal Gaiva. Right? What does a Baal Gaiva do? A Baal Gaiva is always right. A Baal Gaiva is always right. He's an Omeid. He always stands his ground. And I will say it's an incredible thing. What happens when you deal with people who always stand their ground and who are always right? Sifufim. There's no room for anyone else. It's a claustrophobic experience. I would say anyone who has to deal with Balei Gaiva, and we all have to deal with Balei Gaiva, so then it's the Balei Gaiva we have to deal with ourselves, right? But right? We all have to deal with Balei Gaiva and Tzipufim. It's a suffocating experience. There's no room, there's no dialogue, there's nothing. I will say something amazing happens. Mishtachavim. What's Mishtachavim? Mishtachavim is a humble person. A person who knows how to yield, a person who knows how to give in to the other, because being happy is so much more important than being right. Right? A person who doesn't have to be right all of the time, a person doesn't have to have his way all the time. Something amazing happens when you're mishtachaveh, when you learn how to yield, when you learn how to be humble. What happens, Rabbi Say? Revachim. There is room for everyone. There's room for everyone. And I always wonder, where did the Kotzker get this idea from? Rabbi say it's this Gemara. Kadosh Baruch Hu says about the Baal Gaiva, there's no room for both of us. Rabbi say when a person is a Baal Gaiva, forget about room for other people. There's not even room for the Ribono Shel Olam himself, because the Baal Gaiva, just like the Baal Gaiva, right, sucks up all of the oxygen. He takes up all of the space. There's no room for anyone else. Omdim. Baal Gaiva, Sifufim, no room for anyone else. Mishtachavim, humility, humble, yielding, room for everyone. Gemara goes weiter. And the Gemara says, others say this actually not referring to a Baal Gaiva, but rather referring to people who speak Lashon Hara. Shneimar, milashani b'seis re'eu osa asmis. So I'll say, by the way, there's a lot of overlap also between Lashon Hara and being a Baal Gaiva. We know this, right? Because the only way that a person really feels empowered to speak Lashon Hara is if I feel somehow superior to the person about whom I'm speaking. Right? Humble people don't speak Lashon Hara because they don't feel in a position to speak negatively. So Gaiva and Lashon Hara are very much sister concepts. The Gemara goes weiter. Rav Alexandria, Kol Adam Shbeish Bogasas Ruach. What's the incredible Gemara? Afilu Ruach Kima Ochrasa. But isn't any person who's arrogant, even the smallest wind uproots him. Now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. It's almost right across. Ruach Kima Ochrasa. Paranos Kala Tarfasim Avdaso. Even the smallest discomfort ultimately goes ahead and disturbs him. Which I will say, we know this, right? Because often we also experience this. When a person is a Baal Gaiva, right, everything has to be perfect for him. Right? Everything has to be perfect. And what ends up happening? The smallest disturbance is very upsetting. Right? Smallest disturbance is off-putting. The smallest disturbance, uproots or disrupts the entire equilibrium. Shneimar v'Hashem kiyam nigrash, that the wicked are like the sea, right? Literally like the disturbed sea. Now, what does this mean? Mayam sheish v'kamar avios ruach kima ochraso. Rabbi say this is incredible. The sea, which has many reviuses of water, right? Yet Rabbi says, what's incredible about the sea, right? A small wind could do what? Change the direction and change the flow and create the ripples, right, on the water. Adam she'ein bo el revius achas. That will say literally means a person who only has one revius of blood. That will say, of course, the person is more. But what it means is a person who needs. Rashi says who needs at least a revius of blood flowing through his body for life. Just or a person where a revius of blood is metame tumas meis, as we know. Alachas kama v'kama. I will say a really profound Gemara. I will say it's sometimes it's a good litmus test because I will say sometimes I'm not sure. But I will say because I want to point out like on the other hand there's also a fun. Well, we'll discuss about needing a little bit of gaiva. Right, a person is supposed to be able to stand up for themselves, be machshav themselves. And I will say sometimes the good test as to whether or not I have too much gaiva or not is am I easily disturbed by minor things? Am I easily irritated by minor things? So that's a good like gaiva test. So if things really, little things really annoy me, right? Someone doesn't do what I needed them to do, or someone says something I don't like, or someone behaves, if I'm easily irritated, right, by anything, that's usually a sign that I'm suffering from gaiva. The Baal Gaiva can't take anything not going his way. Such an incredible idea. So here, this is actually interesting Gemara. So here, we're spending this entire time focusing on the fact that you can't have gaiva. Comes along Rabbi name of Rav, a Talmid Chacham has to have a tiny amount of gaiva, literally 1/8 of an eighth. 1/8 of an eighth of gaiva. That was saying, now why does the Talmid Chacham need to have a little bit of gaiva? Take a look. First wide line. Echad mishmona b'shmina. It's very interesting. Mishkal katanhu v'ainu uchla kilomer tzarch sheyebo ma'at gaiva shelo yihu kali harosh mistolelin bo v'yehei dvarav miskablin alein bal karcham. So Rabbi said the Talmid Chacham, the right refers to the leader over here, right? The Talmid Chacham needs to ensure that people don't mistreat him. So Rabbi says, so sometimes what that requires is his ability to assert himself, even when people are pushing back. I will say it's a fascinating idea. So the leader, the Gemara calls this a little bit of gaiva, which is the ability to be assertive when the leader needs to be assertive in order that he could properly lead. But again, I will say, how much gaiva should the Talmid Chacham have? Again, 1/8 of an eighth, right? So you're talking about, I guess the technical term would be a smidge, right? How much what's an eighth of an eighth, right? The idea is this tiny little bit of, which also means is 99% of the time the Talmid Chacham should be humble. There's a 1% of time where he needs to say, no, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it, right? Again, I heard, right? Got it, heard everything. But I will say, but again, that's an eighth of an eighth, right? If it's happening all of the time, the Talmid Chacham is abusing that, right? If it's happening none of the time, the Talmid Chacham is missing a critical tool for his leadership. So the Gemara goes like, I'm going to Rav Yoshua, or ma'atrele kisas shibelta. And I will say Talmid Chacham who has this right little bit of gaiva, it adorns him like the beard adorns the stalk of wheat. In other words, I will say, so this complements him. Right? So Talmid Chacham, who possesses this very little bit of gaiva, the ability to be assertive, right? When he needs to be assertive, right? Only in those select times where he needs to come out strong, Shalamaisa, that becomes a compliment to him, just like the beard is to the stalk of grain. Amrava, Bishamta de Ispe or Bishamta de Lespe. This is incredible. Rava says, the truth is, literally, Shana Rava says excommunication, which literally means it is terrible. It is terrible. If ultimately, again, if you have gaiva, and it's terrible ultimately, again, if you don't have gaiva. So essentially, Rav is saying gaiva is one of those things of, it's bad if you do, bad if you don't. Meaning what? If you have gaiva, it's terrible, right? If you don't have any gaiva, it's about the Talmid Chacham, it's also terrible. And I will say, this is a very delicate thing, because I will say gaiva is fire. Gaiva is literally fire. And the problem with the person, ultimately, again, in the leadership position, I will say, by the way, we speak about also like a leadership position, so this could also manifest itself in different ways, right? All of us occupy leadership positions in different places, and this is often the incredible tension, that on one hand, a person, the leader, doesn't want to be the person who throws his weight around. It doesn't always want to be the person saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and not take in collaborative voices. But at the same time, the leader also at times has to say, no, this is what we're doing. So Rava says it's an incredible thing, right? You're excommunicated if you do have it, you're excommunicated if you don't have it. That this gaiva ultimately is dangerous, because if you have too much of it, terrible, none of it, terrible. He goes on, he says, good. Nachman disagrees. Yitzchak says, gaiva is one of those things, you should have none of it. None of it. Even if you're a Talmud Chacham, you should have none of it. After all, because what does the pasuk say? It is an abomination to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kol givalev, anyone of arrogant heart. So I will say, just pointing out, you see this tension in Chazal themselves, about on one hand, there is what we'll call a positive arrogance. And I will say, what I would call positive arrogance is not arrogance. What is it? What is it? It's assertiveness, right? Channeled arrogance comes in the form of being assertive. And sometimes, especially in leadership capacities, assertiveness is important to move things forward. But it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous, right? I will say. Why? Because you've all experienced this. Once you get a little taste of assertiveness, right? What begins to happen? You're like, what do you like? I like this, right? Hey, this is good, right? How much could we accomplish? How much could we do? And there's a taiva for that gaiva, right? And ultimately, again, let's do this, right? I could. So again, this is the danger. This is the danger. Is a person really capable of balancing? So that's what you have over here. Rav Nachman says, I'm telling you, don't touch any of it with a 10-foot pole. Because once you get that taiva for gaiva, it's very difficult to go ahead and stop yourself. Incredible. We'll say a person's prayers are only heard if he makes his heart like flesh. Now we'll say like flesh means he makes his heart soft, i.e. humility. Person's tefillas are only heard if he is humble. Shene'emar v'yomi de chodesh bechadsho yaval kol basar lishtachavos. Amrav zera basar ksiv bei v'nirpa adam lo ksiv bei v'nirpa. Amrav Shmuel says, so again, the idea over here is, when can you come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Basar. If the heart is like flesh, if the heart is soft, i.e. humility. Shmuel say is an incredible, it sort of makes sense. The only time I'm really going to daven, only really going to daven with kavanah, is if I'm humble. Because if I think that I have everything, I am self-sufficient, I am self-reliant, then there's absolutely no need for me to come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a complete heart. Only the humble heart recognizes that it needs prayer. Both says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is incredible. Adam. Both say the word Adam is actually contraction. What does it stand for? Afer, ash or dust. Dam, blood. Mara, bile. We'll say, it's pretty profound over there, right? That Adam, right? So we think, I'm Adam, I'm man. Yeah, what's Adam? What's Adam? Adam is dirt, blood, and bile. That's what man is made up of. We'll say, again, this follows on the heels of the humility Gemara, because sometimes the best way to remain humble is to recognize what you are and what you come from. Basar, what's basar? Busha, srucha, rima. Literally, again, embarrassment. Srucha means like putrid, thank you, putrid, right? Rima means worms, which ultimately, again, the body decomposes, the body goes back to the earth. Ika de Amri, Sha'al. Others say, instead of Srucha, put in there Sha'al. Sha'al will say refers to Gehenna, Tichsiv Bishin, because ultimately, Basar, remember, Srucha is with a Samich, Sha'al ultimately, again, is with a Shin. Amr Vashi, Kol Adam Shish Bogasro. So we'll say, so again, the idea, what is that doing over here? That's part of the humility discussion. You want to know what Adam stands for. You want to know what Basar, what flesh stands for. All of these very simple, humble things. So keep humble, I will say. Keep humble. Any person, ultimately, again, who is arrogant, l'sof nifchas. At the end, I will say, ultimately, again, will become, literally, Rashi says, pachos ba'anashim. An arrogant person is always seeking out and wanting kavod. And the irony of irony is, the more kavod you seek out, ultimately, the less important you become amongst people. Amud Beis. So I'll say, where do we know this from? Velaseis v'lasapachas. So both say this is a great drasha. Now this is talking about saras. Ve'ein seis el lashon gavah shenemar v'akala harim v'aramim v'akala gvom hanasuos ve'ein sapachas el tefillah shenemar sapchunina El achos hakahunos le'echol pas lechem. I will say, so by the way, this drasha, I just want to point out, this is an incredible drasha. La seis v'la sapacha. So both say, seis, the way the Gemara is translating, seis means like, means to lift something up. Something that ultimately, again, wants to be lifted up, right? Spends its whole life trying to lift itself up, i.e. gaiba, sapachas. Will ultimately again be brought down. I will say that's the entire. If you want to remember the entire Gemara, just remember that drasha: la seis, la sapachas. Those who want to go ahead and propel themselves upwards, ultimately again are brought downwards. So I will say you begin to see. Here's the futility of gaiva, right? See what I'm saying? It's one thing. If I'm going to sin and get something out of it, then one can make the argument that maybe it's worth it. Now, I want to go on record as saying it's still not worth it, right? It's still not worth it, right? But lamaisa, at least, person's going to commit an avera, right? A person's going to run a Ponzi scheme, right? And they're going to walk away with a few $1 million. Okay, so at least they get bad, very bad, right? It's illegal, right? But at least you get something out of it. The one thing that always is like incredibly counterintuitive is when a person sins and I get nothing out of it. Not only do I not get anything, but what happens? It has an adverse impact. So that's what I was trying to show over here. Gaiva, right? A person leads a life of gaiva. Not only do you not get the covet that you so badly desire and want, but what ends up happening is a setback. You're diminished. La seis v'la sapachas. Let's go back to Rabbi Shmuel Levi. We'll say, see how much the Rebbe Shalom loves humble people. Shebesha, we'll say, this is absolutely beautiful. So nemuchei ruach, humility. See how beloved humility is in the eyes of Hashem. Shebesha, shebeis hamikdash kayum. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, Adam makriv ola, schar ola biyado, mincha, schar mincha biyado. So when the Beis Hamikdash stood, so what would happen? If a person went ahead and offered up an ola, he would have reward for an ola. He offered up a mincha, he'd have reward for a mincha. Avamisha daito shvela. But I will say, someone who's, so I will say, the idea over here is, when the Beis Hamikdash stood and you offered up a carbon, what did you get credit for? The particular carbon you offered. However, watch this, I will say. Listen, avamisha daito shvela. But someone ultimately who is humble, ma'ala alav akasav kilo ekrivo kala karbanos kulam. But I will say, humility is as if you've offered up every single carbon. Shnei amar, zivchei elokim ruach nishbara. Because I will say, what does it say? A broken spirit, a humble spirit is zivchei elokim, plural. A humble spirit is like karbanos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will say, I just want to point out something absolutely amazing. Right? Isn't this incredible? So the Beis Hamikdash stood, you offer up a particular carbon, you get the reward for that carbon. When a person is humble, humility, it's as if you've offered up every carbon. And what's the logic of this? I will say, what's the whole chap of a carbon? What's the whole chap of a carbon? Right? Carbon from Lashon of Karov, right? The whole idea of a carbon is to engender a sense of closeness and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will say, humility engenders that closeness. Why? Because when a person is humble, let's say, what does humility remind me of more than anything? That I'm totally and wholly reliant on the Ribono Shel Olam. That I can't do anything myself in this world. So I will say, humility by itself accomplishes what all of the karbanos combined try to accomplish. Isn't this incredible? And therefore, when a person is humble, it's as if he's offered up every single carbon. Humility engenders the same results as all of the karbanos were supposed to engender. It's incredible. Not only that, the Gemara says, Ella, Sheid Tfilos Nemesa. So also when a person is humble, his tfilos are never turned away. Shene Emar, Leiv Nishbar V'Nitke, Elohim Lo Sivzeh. The pasuk says, literally, a broken and downtrodden heart, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, Lo Sivzeh, means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will never despise. The idea is, again, when a humble person davens, HaKadosh Baruch Hu always hears that tefillah. I will say, perhaps, listen to this Gemara, I think perhaps one of the most incredible Gemaras in all of Shas. Here it is. Kol Hasham, Archosav, Ba'olam Azeh, Zoche V'Rabbi Yeshuaso Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Listen to this. Whoever measures his ways in this world ultimately, again, will be privileged to see this salvation of God. Now, we'll say, now what does this mean? What does he measures his ways? We'll say, take a look at Rashi. Shamar Chosav, Mechashev Hefsid Mitzvah, Keneget Schara. So Rabbi say he measures ultimately again that which is lost through the benefit of a mitzvah. I'm sorry, that which is lost through the performance of a mitzvah, opposite the reward. Meaning what, Rabbi say? Listen to this, and it's absolutely incredible. Rabbi say, so Kol Hashem Chosav means a person who lives life in a constant state of cost-benefit analysis. So Rabbi say, successful living demands a cost-benefit analysis. How so? Because everything in life has a cost, and everything in life has a benefit. How do you decide what to do and what not to do? How do you decide that? And I will say, what's the answer? What's the answer? Cost-benefit analysis. That's what it is. So I have a mitzvah in front of you. I will say, does a mitzvah have a cost? Does a mitzvah have a cost? Oh yeah. Mitzvahs have a dramatic cost, right? Often again, dramatic costs, but there's also a benefit. Right? Do Averos have benefits? Oh, yes. I know, a bunch of tzaddikim. No one's nodding their head. Yes, right? Of course, Averos have incredible, ridiculous benefits. But, they also have dramatic cost. So, Kol Hashem Archosav, Ba'olam Hazeh, whoever lives life with a proper cost-benefit analysis, Zocha Veroa B'Yeshuas HaShakash. Say, such a person will lead a successful life, right? Literally, again, it literally means he will see the salvation of Hashem, which means you will lead a successful life. What's where against Shanai Amar? Shabbat said the Gemara over here quotes the pasuk. Now, the lashon of the pasuk is v'sam derech er'ena b'yeshalokim. Literally, he who creates a path will see the salvation of God. Al tikri v'sam. Don't read it as v'sam elo. The Sham Derech. He will place a path. I will say, such an incredible Gemara. Successful living requires constant and consistent cost-benefit analysis. I will say, imagine for a moment if before I did an Aveira, I paused, I said, okay, I know the benefits, what are the costs? Imagine before, I'm not sure should I do a mitzvah. I know the costs, let me think about the benefits. How much better life would be? I will say, weiter. Kate and Mekana, I will say very quickly. So let's remember again, back to Kinoi, back to the Mishnah. By the way, remember, we are in Masechah Sotah, right? Just back to our regularly scheduled programming. So watch this. We'll say, very easy piece of Gemara over here. Right? So ultimately, we have an inherent contradiction in the Mishnah. What's the inherent contradiction? Amar la b'fnei shnayim al tadabri mishploni. So we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah, remember we mentioned this when we learned the Mishnah, the Mishnah seems inherently contradictory. How so? Because if you remember again, the Mishnah said, what's the case of Kinui? The case of Kinui is, well, Ruvain tells his wife Rachel, don't speak with Shimon, right? And then it said, Alma dibur stirahu. Then it will say, sounds like if she were to talk with Shimon, that would be stira, which would then go ahead and trigger the Sotah process. And then it's v'hatatani dibur ima dai mutaris lebeisa mutaris lechol b'truma. Then it said afterwards that if she did speak with Shimon, right, ultimately she's still permitted to her husband, which sounds like dibur would not be stira. Amar dibur lo klumi. Amar Rabbi, this is what it means to say. I'll say, Amar Rabbi, halachik kamar. Here we go. Al tadabri v'dibra. If he warned her not to speak with Shimon, but she spoke with Shimon, al tadabri v'nisra, or he warned her not to speak with Shimon, and she was alone with Shimon, or al-tisteri, or he warns her, don't be alone with Shimon, v'dibra imo, and she spoke with Shimon, adayin mutaris labeisa, umutaris lechol b'truma. Both saying all of these cases, ultimately again, she is still permitted to her husband, and still permitted to eat truma. Nichnasa imo labeisa seiser. But ultimately, again, if she goes in with him, and alone with him in the house, I will say, now what does this mean? Let me fill in the blanks over here. Rashi says, if Reuven said to Rachel, don't be alone with Shimon. And then Rachel was alone with Shimon. V'shasa kedei tuma, and she's alone with him for enough time for defilement to have occurred. Asur lebeisa, v'asur lechol b'truma. In that case, ultimately, again, she is not permitted to remain married to her husband, and she would not be permitted to go and eat truma. In other words, Rabbi say. So now the Gemara is clarifying this for me. Right? Rabbi say, what is kinui? What is kinui? What is proper warning? So Rabbi say, kinui is where a husband says to his wife, do not be alone. Altisteri imploni. Do not be alone, ultimately, again, with a particular individual. And I will say, what is violation of that kinui. What is violation of that kinui? If she is indeed alone with someone else. That becomes the violation. I will say that case and only that case. Therefore, I will say warning about any other behavior is not a warning. So if he says to her, I don't want you talking with Shimon, look, he can say whatever he wants, but that's not going to trigger the process. Similarly, again, even if he warns her not to be alone, and let's say he catches her talking to Shimon, that is not going to trigger the Sotah process either. Sotah process is only triggered when, number one, when there's a kinui about seclusion. Do not be alone with Shimon. And I will say, what is stira? What is stira? What is stira? When she is alone with Shimon. Those are the specific aspects, specific behaviors that trigger the Sotah process. Any deviation from that may be bad, right? May be bad, but is not going to trigger the Sotah process. Good, I will say, we'll go a little bit back to another minute. So the Gemara says, V'meis choletzes. Now remember again, let me just say this outside, then we'll stop it for today. Remember the Mishnah said, I will say, what happens if halacha l'maisa, after stira, he died. So we'll say, now in other words, the Sotah process has been initiated, but what hasn't happened yet? What hasn't happened? They haven't gone to the Beis HaMikdash to be able to go ahead and drink the Meis Sotah. So if she were to die in that case again, and let's say he were to die without children, halacha l'maisa, so ultimately Yibum would not be permitted, Chalitza would be mad. There are We'll pick up mention with this sugi tomorrow. What a day. What a day. What a day. What a day. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. See everyone tomorrow, Mirat Hashem. All right, so Chavra, have a bye-bye tomorrow. I'll be there with you. Jerry, I'm sitting next to you on that rooftop in Mirat Hashem tomorrow.